Tech family, let me ask you a question. What's better than reviewing one exciting new laptop? 2, 3, 4? That's right, we go big or we go home. Today is the day. We're going to go head to head with an in-depth look at the new MacBook Pro M1, the HP Spectre 14 with that OLED 3x2 screen, Dell's recently refreshed XPS, and the MacBook Air M1. By the way, if you're new to the channel, I'm Josh and I buy and review a lot of laptops and talk, you know what, we know each other now. I think I just value your time, so let's skip the intro and in future get straight down to the content. Okay, primer on how I review laptops. I review them like a real user. You don't just buy a car engine, you buy the whole car, or at least that's how I shop. Therefore, I'm going to take a completely unbiased look at these laptops in their entirety to determine which of them is worthy of your dollars. And at the end, give my recommendations on who should buy the Pro, who should buy the Air, who should buy the XPS, and who should buy the Spectre. And when I say unbiased, I mean it. If you've seen my recent videos on which laptops I actually use, you'll see I use Apple and I use Windows pretty much equally. I'll post a link to that video in the description below. Now, I'm sorry that it took this long to get this video out, but shock horror, I was determined to use these laptops myself for a duration of time before sharing my thoughts with you. Now, with that said, these are still recently released machines, especially the MacBooks, with their new M1 chip. So I might do a follow-up video on my thoughts if they evolve. As per usual, any updates or corrections that came out after this video will be posted in the description below, so make sure you check that too. Here is the configuration on screen for each laptop. The MacBook Pro, Spectre, and XPS all have 16GB of RAM. The Air only has 8GB as I really wanted to see how Apple's cheapest model compared. Let's hit performance. At the time of filming, all these laptops were fully updated. Latest operating systems, BIOS, drivers, and of course their programs. Also, quick note on how I test. These are real machines with real software installed on them, so my benchmark results may be lower than others. That's because these computers have tons of things running on them. Dropbox, OneDrive, Discord, Citrix, MySQL, and much more. You get the picture. There are so many benchmarks I could run, same goes for real-world applications, but to keep this video watchable, I've chosen a couple that I feel paint an accurate picture of what is happening here. If you've been following the news, you'll know that the new Apple M1 processors are insanely powerful, and that's exactly what we are seeing in Geekbench, both in single and multi-core. These scores are incredibly impressive. In fact, I added an AMD Ryzen 4700U 8-core 8-thread processor to the graph, so you could see that they even beat that out. Well done, Apple, like seriously. The HP Spectre appears to trail the XPS by a margin of around 10%. Let's switch to the GPU test. You can see that the new Intel 11th Gen Xe graphics trades blows with Apple, although at the end of the day, Apple comes out on top again. Interestingly enough, in this test, the Spectre beat out the XPS. Now, when we switch to Cinebench R23, which maxes out the CPU's performance, you can see that AMD still holds its massive lead over Intel. But Apple's M1 chips are hot on AMD's tail. And as you'll see later, they are achieving this with far less heat and fan noise than these other CPUs. I mean, heck, the MacBook Air doesn't even have a fan. Now, I do want to be the voice of reason here. The Apple M1 processor is absolutely phenomenal. But please don't think that this version of Apple Silicon can replace AMD processors in larger laptops. Here is the HP Omen score for comparison. Let's take a look at real-world applications. Please note, I compared different laptops across different operating systems, so I need to use software that is cross-platform compatible. This means these are really worst-case scenarios for Apple as the applications are not native to Apple Silicon. In my coding test, the MacBooks performed well. Not competitive with the XPS, but pretty good given they were running on Rosetta 2. When it came to my large SQL database import, which is a mostly single-threaded, storage-intensive task, the Apples completely dominated. Onto some video editing using Premiere Pro. The Macs performed incredibly well, and so did the Spectre. Keep in mind the MacBook Air only has 8GB of RAM. Little note, there are a lot of videos out there saying how much of a beast the MacBook M1s are when it comes to video editing. And I would presume that for Apple's native Final Cut, it would perform substantially better than I'm seeing here. However, please be wary. Many of the videos I've seen claiming that these laptops can edit 4K videos and above are editing raw files which aren't as intensive on your processor as they don't need to be decoded before editing. Or they're using simpler projects. I mean, take a look at the Premiere project for the video you are watching right now. At some points, we have up to 5 4K videos being used for a single frame, effects, LUTs, etc. If you think that these little Macs can compete with bigger laptops, I'd temper your expectations. Take a look at my export results on the HP Omen with its powerful AMD 4800H CPU and dedicated NVIDIA graphics. Now, I didn't have time to test a lot of games, but I do want to clear up some basic misinformation that I've seen out there, stating that Macs are now good for gaming. Seriously, most AAA games for the last couple of years are not even available for the Mac. Sure, Macs can now play games designed for iPads and iPhones, but realistically, these are designed for touchscreens, not a device with a trackpad or a mouse. Plus, Macs by default have mouse acceleration, which makes accurate control in games challenging unless you change this setting, which can be hard to do as Apple tends to like to periodically set it back. So, if you do want to do some gaming on your laptop, make sure to check that the game you want to play runs on Apple before jumping in. Let's now look at temperatures you would actually feel when using the laptop. The MacBook Pro 13 performs very well. It never gets too hot to the touch. In fact, it barely gets warm. The MacBook Air, though, does get quite warm, particularly on the bottom of the laptop. So it should be fine if you use it on a desk, but it will feel quite toasty if you are doing intensive tasks with it sitting on your lap. By the way, in real use, I did notice the MacBook Air getting a little warm, hitting around 40 Celsius on the keyboard deck when I had a large number of non-Apple native applications open. The Spectre is an even more exaggerated version of the Air. Its keyboard deck is very cool to the touch and never gets warm. In fact, these measurements were taken across the entire keyboard deck. The Spectre's palm rests were actually much cooler than the measurements you see on screen. On the flip side, the underside of the Spectre got very toasty, similar to the Air, so you won't want to use this laptop under heavy load when using it on your lap. The Dell XPS was just pretty much regularly warm on the keyboard deck and the back of the laptop all the time. When it came to fan noise when under load, the Spectre was the loudest and the Air was the quietest as it doesn't have a fan. The Spectre, even though loud, has a very low-pitched noise, so it isn't as bad as the graph would make you think. The MacBook Pro, on the other hand, is considerably quieter. However, its fan is high-pitched, so you will notice it when it's on. That being said, it's very rarely on in everyday usage. The Spectre, on the other hand, has a very odd fan curve. It doesn't run the fan much till the laptop heats up a lot and then it suddenly blasts the fan. When it comes to the Air, Apple has done a phenomenal job. I mean, seriously, to get this performance without a fan is just epic. The XPS, you hear its fan regularly, but it's not overly disturbing. For fan noise, the MacBook Air wins it, then the Pro, then the Dell XPS, and then the Spectre. When we look at SSD performance, we see that the Macs do very well once again. The XPS also performed phenomenally. The Spectre, though, performed very poorly. It's a shame, as the Spectre, like the XPS, has a user upgradable SSD. But it's one of those laptops that's really hard to open, as you have to rip off the rubber foot at the bottom to get at the screws. Super annoying. You can see the Wi-Fi performance results on screen, all are using Wi-Fi 6 with the same router and internet connection. Overall, to wrap with performance, every laptop you see here is powerful enough for casual users and basic tasks like learning to code or editing 1080 videos. The only laptop that had any sort of slowdown in day-to-day usage was the MacBook Air. Of course, when I ran a lot of non-native programs on it, but when I switched to mainly Apple programs, everything was fine. Regardless, in the performance test, this is an outright massive victory for Apple. Not only are they able to compete with Intel, in many benchmarks and applications they are beating Intel by substantial margins. And they have done it in a way that is so power efficient that it mostly eliminates annoying fan noise and heat you feel when using your laptop. I cannot tell you how wonderful it was to do a Zoom call on these MacBooks and not have the laptop heat up and hear a lot of fan noise. Thank you, Apple. Plus, with these M1 laptops' increased performance, they are good enough for most coding tasks you do on the go and small 4K video editing projects. I'd call this completely evolutionary. Congratulations to Apple for making this bold move. Now, let's take a look at the rest of the laptops beyond the processors to see if these Intel competitors are even worth looking at. Firstly, the display. All 4 of these laptops have excellent screens. That being said, I'm going to rank them as there are some pretty big differences. Number 1 is the HP Spectre 14. Its 3000 by 2000 pixel 13.5 inch OLED display with its 3:2 aspect ratio is glorious to look at. Using it makes you feel like you're on a much larger device, such as one with a 15.6 inch display. Although its display is technically not that much larger than the MacBook's 13.3-inch ones, it really feels like you are using a different class of device, one that is much more productive and not crammed. For a comparison, when I set the MacBook's display scaling to more space and the Spectre's to 175% in Windows, which is a level that I feel comfortably maximizes the amount of information on the screen on both these devices, the Spectre by default only shows 3 extra lines of code. But I know this sounds weird. It's enough to make the difference. Trust me, when you are using them side by side, you really do feel like you're on a different, more comfortable class of device when using the Spectre. And yes, I know you can fine-tune this by changing the font sizes. In fact, when I compared other apps like the same website side by side, it seems as though I'm seeing 5 extra lines on the Spectre. And even though the Spectre's display is technically less bright than the MacBook Pro's, in real use it feels brighter. Perhaps that's due to the increased contrast that you get with an OLED display. Also, the true blacks make it an excellent laptop for watching movies, even if you do get a little more black bars above and below the movie due to that 3:2 aspect ratio. Alright, the next best display on the list is the MacBook Pro's, which is an excellent display. For third and last, I'd say it's a tie between the XPS and the MacBook Air. The XPS's display, by the numbers, is technically a better display, but all 4 of my XPS laptops with the 4K Lite display have had minor backlight bleed. Just compare the XPS's bleed to my MacBook Air here in this shot. There is literally no backlight bleed on the Air. It's a little annoying to spend this much on an XPS laptop and have this kind of poor quality control. The Air, on the other hand, is a substantial step forward compared to the Air's display last year, which itself was a substantial step up from the prior year. It is disappointing that the Macs still have large bezels. It would have been nicer to have a large edge-to-edge display, but it still looks pretty good. Honestly, all of these devices are awesome and plenty bright for indoor use. If you want a touchscreen, your only options are the Spectre and the XPS. Let's talk about the keyboard. Although both the MacBook Pro and Air's keyboard feels very high quality and accurate to type on, I personally don't find them as comfortable as the XPS or the Spectre. They feel a bit low travel and uncomfortable. Not as low travel as the older butterfly keys, but you definitely feel the keys bottoming out. It's certainly usable and not distracting, but it isn't an enjoyable typing experience. The MacBook Air is a little more comfortable than the Pro due to the slope of the laptop and also its lighter weight, which matters if you are typing with it on your lap. I personally found the MacBook Pro's edge bit into my wrist a little. The keyboards in the XPS and Spectre are both fantastic and feel great. It's odd as the XPS's keyboard is also low travel, but it has a more satisfying click to the key press than both the MacBooks. The Spectre has the most comfortable keyboard. It's an absolute joy to use. It feels very luxurious with ample key travel. In fact, I would say the Spectre is as comfortable as the best keyboards in the business, including the Microsoft Surface Book 3 and Lenovo's ThinkPads. Both the XPS and Spectre's keyboards are the ones that I really look forward to using when writing scripts for these videos. A couple of other notes about the keyboards. The XPS keyboard can be a little distracting at times due to the heat coming from the laptop. The MacBook Air's keyboard does still have the function key row, which I feel more useful for programming applications that often, by default, use function keys mapped to common commands. One little annoying thing about the Air is that there used to be function buttons to raise and lower the keyboard backlight levels, but they have been replaced with other buttons, for example the mic button to enable dictation. At times when working at night, I found the default brightness too bright, and I'm left with no option to bring it down. I did ask Apple support about this, but at the time of the video they had no solution and abruptly hung up the live chat. When it comes to the MacBook Pro though, I don't mind the touch bar. I really find the sliders to control things like screen brightness and volume more efficient than pressing a button. When choosing the color of your Spectre, please keep in mind the following. If you get the silver model, the keys may be hard to make out with the backlight on in daytime environments. That is because of the lack of contrast between the white key color and the silver keycaps. For maximum contrast, get a model with the darker keycaps like the one that I have here. Look, all of these laptops have good keyboards that you shouldn't have any major issues with. But in terms of comfort, it's the Spectre, then the XPS, then the MacBook Air, and lastly the MacBook Pro. Alright, trackpads. The MacBooks continue to lead with their super smooth and accurate tracking. The trackpad doesn't actually depress when you click it, but just feels like it does. This creates a uniform feel no matter where you click, and you don't lose accuracy when clicking in the back corners. The XPS is hot on the heels of the MacBooks with its excellent trackpad. The Spectre is a little behind and doesn't feel quite as accurate, but it's still pretty good and certainly very usable. The chassis of the MacBook Pro, Air and XPS are all excellently constructed and feel very sturdy. The Spectre's top is not at the same level, it definitely depresses if I press it, so please be careful if you place anything on top of that laptop. All the keyboard decks though feel very sturdy, no problems there, and to be honest, construction even on the Spectre is very good. That being said, my MacBook Air came with a tiny chip on the front, and my MacBook Pro had a loose S key. I've never had quality control issues with Apple before, but I do want to bring this to your attention as it did happen. In terms of the way the laptops look, the Macs and XPS look amazing and really match my interior design department very well. I would avoid getting the XPS in frost white though. I had that model and it showed scuffs and dirt really easily. With the Spectre, unfortunately you are faced with a bit of a bad choice here. The Spectre comes in 3 colors. Silver, which I feel looks the most modern, but unfortunately shows up scratches and suffers from the lack of contrast between the keyboard backlight and the key color that I mentioned earlier. Then you get to choose from Poseidon Blue and Nightfall Black, both of which I don't like the look of. In fact, I feel Nightfall Black, my model, looks kind of poopy. I'm sorry, I really don't like that color combination. Look, design is subjective and you might love it, but I don't. What makes it tough is Best Buy tends to have some amazing deals on HP Spectre laptops, but they seem to only have the Nightfall Black color. I would have preferred to try the blue. Also, what makes it worse is my dark colored HP Spectre picks up fingerprints very easily. By the way, while on the topic of build quality, look at the Spectre's braided charging cable. Pretty cool. In terms of ports, it's a tight race between the Spectre and the XPS. The Spectre is the only laptop to have a USB-A port, which is super useful. Also, because it still has 2 USB Type-C ports, the USB-A port essentially gives this laptop 3 ports of USB connectivity. This is nicer than the other laptops that all have only 2. The XPS, on the other hand, has a charging-capable USB-C port on both sides of the laptop. I really like this design as it's the only laptop that you won't have to run a cable around the back if your power outlet is on the other side. Both the XPS and Spectre have a micro SD card reader, which can be useful. The Macs, on the other hand, come last here with 2 USB-C ports on the same side. By the way, the USB-A port in the Spectre is 5 gigabits and all USB-C ports on all these laptops are Thunderbolt enabled. One issue I noticed with the Spectre that I want to mention, when I plugged it into an external 4K monitor, I could only get 30Hz refresh rate on that external display. I tried going to Intel's graphics app to change this, but it was grayed out. I have had this problem with other HPs before, although it worked perfectly with my Dell XPS and Inspiron 7400, which both have the same Intel graphics. I hope HP fixes this soon, so right now, don't get the Spectre if you plan to use it with an external 4K display, as it just won't be a smooth experience. Now, the MacBooks can only work with one external display up to 6K at 60Hz when plugged in directly. I think more than one display is a little bit of an edge case, however, I hear you can solve this with a hub and run 2 displays. To be honest, I hate using Macs as desktops. I don't like the native mouse acceleration, and I don't find any keyboard design for the Apple system to be remotely as comfortable as some of the awesome keyboards designed for Windows machines, like my mechanical HP Spacer keyboard. Yes, you can remap keys, but it just isn't the same experience. Now, let's take a look at portability of the laptops. For battery life, there is a massive divide here. It's a huge win for Apple. Their super power efficient M1 chip has both the MacBook Pro and Air easily lasting a full day of normal use with adequate screen brightness. These are by far the best performance in battery life of any laptop I've ever seen. By far. Honestly guys, they lasted so long that my normal battery life test of watching movies and writing scripts on the laptop barely dented it. The MacBook Pro takes the win with its larger 61 watt-hour battery, followed by the Air with its 49.9 watt-hour one. The Spectre is a distant third as it has a substantially bigger battery at 66 watt-hours compared to the Dell XPS. Expect it to comfortably last about 6 to 7 hours or so depending on usage. The XPS though has a smaller battery at 52 watt-hours and is not a great performer, especially with the 4K-like screen. All the other laptops have displays with less pixels than 4K, which means they don't need as much power to drive the display. But those other laptops are still much higher resolution than Full HD, so you won't see the pixels when looking at them. Kind of the best of both worlds. Good battery life and display clarity. Honestly, in my opinion, the XPS has gone overboard here with its 4K-like display, and it results in worse battery life. Don't expect anything more than 5 hours on it, even with the screen turned right down. Get the full HD screen on the XPS if you want remotely decent battery life. Here are the weights of each of them. A lot of reviewers have called out that the MacBook Air is not that much lighter than the MacBook Pro. That's true. But when you add in the charger, which is substantially bigger on the MacBook Pro, the total carry weight of the Air is a decent amount lighter. The pro of the Pro's bigger charger, excuse the pun, is that it will charge the laptop faster. Overall though, the Spectre does really well here. It's lighter than the MacBook Pro with a bigger screen. When you look at total carry weight though, the Spectre has a heavier charger. That being said, the Spectre does use USB-C charging, and I can confirm works fine with my lighter Dell charger for casual tasks like browsing the web and using Office. The Spectre also comes with a convenient protective laptop sleeve. This all being said, because the battery life is so good on the MacBooks, you don't need to bring a charger at all, which makes them even more portable. Honestly though, all these laptops are super portable, but I'd rate the MacBook Pro, the Air, and the Spectre above the XPS, the Pro and Air due to their excellent battery life, and the Spectre because of that gorgeous large display in a lightweight package. Alright, let me know which webcam you like. Here's how the webcam looks and sounds on the Dell XPS 9310 in excellent lighting conditions. Here's how the HP Spectre's webcam looks and sounds. Here's how the MacBook Air M1's webcam looks and sounds in excellent lighting conditions. Here's how the MacBook Pro 13's webcam looks and sounds. I felt the XPS was by far the worst, the Spectre was surprisingly decent, and I felt on par with the MacBook Pro and the Air. It is odd that the Macs flipped me around, as the plant should be on the right side. In terms of the audio quality, I felt the Pro was the clearest, followed by the Air, then the Spectre and the XPS. Keep in mind, the low fan noise of the MacBook Pro and none of the Air means less background noise being picked up by the mics of those laptops, which is great. In terms of speaker quality, take a listen. Now with the Spectre, the volume by default doesn't get that loud. I found that there is a Bang & Olufsen app where you can pump up the volume a bit more. Take a re-listen. Overall, all the speakers on these laptops in isolation were pretty good and totally usable. But when played side by side, the MacBook Pro to my ears sounded the clearest, followed by the MacBook Air, the Spectre, and XPS were good, but not at that level. If it's important to you, the latency mon results of the XPS and Spectre weren't great. Let's talk about some miscellaneous things. The Spectre is the only device in this roundup that can fold into a tablet. It's very comfortable to take notes on or draw on. You can purchase an XPS 2-in-1 version that you can do the same thing to. By the way, all the laptops had fingerprint readers, the MacBooks and XPS work the best. The XPS and Spectre do have Windows Hello facial recognition, which is nice. By the way, the Spectre was the only device that didn't open with one hand. However, I'm actually okay with this. That's because it is a 2-in-1. I'd prefer a sturdier hinge on this type of device. The MacBooks have that always on feature, which means the laptop is on the moment you open the lid. Honestly, I found this made no difference, as the XPS and Spectre, with their Windows Hello facial login, were both super quick to get into anyway. In terms of operating systems, I found macOS's Big Sur looked by far the best. A gorgeous operating system. That being said, the pop-ups, OMFG. Seriously, by default, I have never received so many in-your-face pop-ups and notifications. It was really annoying. You can, of course, mute many of them, but as I said, it's annoying. The Spectre came with the most bloatware, and the XPS came with McAfee only. PC manufacturers and McAfee, stop trying to trick people into these subscriptions. It's wrong, and I personally believe unethical. If you want to run Linux, right now the Spectre and XPS are the winners. I was able to successfully boot into both Ubuntu and Fedora. I do plan to add proper Linux testing to future videos. In terms of application compatibility on the MacBook M1s, I am pleased and impressed that almost everything worked really well. I tested so many applications that are designed for Intel Macs and they all worked. Zoom, Citrix, IntelliJ, Discord, etc, etc. That being said, a lot of common applications for software devs are not currently running on Apple Silicon, Docker, VMware, etc. So please, if you are reliant on non-Apple applications, make sure to do your research before buying an M1 Apple MacBook. When it comes to pricing, Best Buy has some amazing rotating sales on HP laptops. I purchased my Spectre for $1,299 with 16 gig of RAM and a 1TB SSD. They claim it normally retails for $1,699, but the sales are pretty frequent. So I'm going to say the Spectre and Air are the cheapest of the bunch, the Pro and XPS are the most expensive. Lastly, support. In my experience, Apple support is substantially better than Dell's or HP's. This should be factored into your decision. I spend far more time on the phone to Dell and HP reps trying to explain issues than I do with Apple. Alright, let's wrap this massive video. I gotta be honest, most casual users out there who just browse the web, use Office, should probably buy one of the Macs. They are more powerful, which equates to a greater likelihood of longevity. They are solidly built and they are super comfortable to use with low to no fan noise. Plus, they don't get warm to the touch and they offer the best support in the business. The MacBook Air is a little more comfortable to use with its lighter weight and sloping keyboard. It's also one of the cheapest in this roundup. The Pro wins out on battery life. It's a little more powerful and doesn't get warm, which on occasion the Air does. That being said, there are many valid reasons to get the Spectre or the XPS. Both of these laptops are still very powerful for casual users for many years to come. And if you need to use applications right now that are not supported on the M1 MacBooks or you want to run Linux, both of these are excellent devices. I personally believe the Spectre is the more interesting device. It's a lot of fun to use with its gorgeous screen and 2-in-1 form factor. It's the device I would recommend if you wanted the best possible typing experience, like what I want when I write scripts for these videos. The screen is just so good. The keyboard is the best in the business and it's very comfortable because it's so lightweight. Plus, if you buy it on one of those Best Buy rotating sales, it's insanely cheap. Now, you will have to deal with some fan noise, but the benefits outweigh the cons here. The XPS, on the other hand, is great for someone who wants a super premium small device and doesn't want to go with Apple or can't go with Apple. You will have to accept its poor battery life and expensive price tag though. Honestly, this has been my laptop for some time and I've really enjoyed it. Anyway, that's all for today, folks. I am completely exhausted. This has been a massive effort. I truly hope that this helped you. If it did and you'd like to say thanks, make sure to hit that subscribe button, the thumbs up and the notification bell. I would certainly appreciate it. Also, I'm posting my Instagram and Twitter in the description where you can follow me for behind the scenes coverage and early stage looks at tech before it hits the channel. Anyway, till next time, I will catch you later.